Dear Minister for Jerusalem Affairs, Fadi Hitmi, distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps, dear colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen. It is with a tearful and an auspicious eye that I speak tonight to you. A bit sentimental, of course, because this is my last Europe Day speech in Jerusalem, and probably also the last in my career as an EU diplomat. It is also one where I have some hope, and because in every end there is a beginning, so actually it is a true farewell in the real sense of the word. But I'm truly grateful for the fantastic experiences I was allowed to make, and the wonderful people I was blessed to meet, and the professional opportunities given to me to contribute to EU action in our partner countries across 4 continents. And notably my heads of mission assignments, first in Cuba, then South Sudan, then Mozambique, and now in Palestine, showed me how relevant EU action can be if and once the stars align, but also showed me how poor the impact can be if and when conditions are less conducive. When preparing this speech, I was wondering what topic to address. And looking back at my career and my 3.5 years here in Palestine, I felt that it's appropriate to share with you some key lessons I draw from serving as an EU diplomat. After more than 3 decades as an EU diplomat, allow me to share with you now my first and probably most important personal lesson at this Europe Day reception in Jerusalem. And the occasion could probably not be more fitting to underline this. Nothing is more noble, nothing more dignifying than to serve and to remain loyal to the very principles of the European peace project. For me, throughout all those years and irrespective of where I was posted, respect for human rights, promotion of democracy, and adherence to international law were always the guiding North Star. And I took comfort in the conviction that this is also the very foundation upon which the European Union is built and will continue to be built. The peaceful coexistence of the people of Europe who waged war against each other for most of our recorded history was the most important political goal of the founding fathers of the European Union. They knew that without democracy, human rights for all, rule of law, and economic prosperity, this peace dream would not be possible. And it demands from each generation of young Europeans an unwavering commitment to the foundational principles of the European Union as a peace project. And I trust this can also be applied to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It is thus not by accident that the European Union continues to call on all parties to respect international law and human rights and strengthen democratic governance. From the very beginning of my assignment here in Palestine, I centered my diplomatic engagement on these messages. And this included, of course, as well, engagement with the public. And how could it be otherwise? How could we remain silent in the wake of constant and egregious human rights violations? Not only the Palestinians themselves, but also a concerned public in the region and beyond expects the EU to speak out and defend international law and human rights. And this brings me to my second key lesson. If we want to win the hearts and minds of the people, and especially those suffering from poverty, injustice, and oppression, we need to be seen as defending their rights loud and clear. The High Representative Josep Borrell, in his landmark speech to the EU ambassadors at last year's annual conference in Brussels, could not be clearer about the quintessential role of public diplomacy, and I quote, "Communication is our battlefield. I need my delegations to step up on social media, on TV, in debates. I need you to be much more engaged in this battle of narratives. It is not something secondary. It is a big battle. Who is going to win the spirits and the souls of people?" While this is definitely much needed guidance for your diplomats, it's not always a risk-free course of action. National authorities and other duty bearers in the receiving state seldom like it, as it might influence or even mobilize public opinion against them. And diplomats may be challenged by the receiving state as what may be perceived as interference in internal matters. But here comes my third lesson. And I took inspiration from a quote I've read many years ago and which has stuck with me ever since. It's about advice for someone to be a good diplomat. Someone who can tell the truth to the authorities of the country he's a creditor to without offending them, but also someone who tells the truth to his own authorities at the risk of offending them. And now comes my fourth lesson. While diplomats, of course, are tasked to implement the decisions and policies of their sending state or institution, they also must guide their capitals. It is the duty of diplomats to provide feedback on outcomes and impact, and, where appropriate and necessary, to contribute and influence decision and policy making. Headquarters need the reality check from the ground. For an EU diplomat, this extends to the entire orbit of the EU. The diplomatic service, the EAS of the EU, was explicitly created by the European Union member states to strategize, to initiate, and to implement EU foreign policy, and to coordinate, to oversee, and represent EU joint action. It is a huge responsibility and probably the most important task of EU ambassadors. But it's against this core assignment that EU foreign policy and its key representatives must be judged. Often, we can only hope to have contributed to a process, a policy framework, or a change in approach, both in the receiving state and in our own capital. For one's own sanity, the art lies, as the saying goes, with the ability to blend the pessimism of the intellect with the optimism of the will. I'm not sure I've always found the right balance here. But this clearly inspired me for my fifth and final lesson. Always keep your feet firmly on the ground, but never, ever lose hope. This somewhat naive belief in the progress of history and the betterment of mankind served me well for my posting here in Jerusalem. So when I say I have little doubt that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will eventually be solved, it is indeed an attempt to bring together a sober analysis of facts and trends with a belief in future leaders to act with more resolve and foresight. It is, of course, for the Palestinians and the Israelis to decide on the constitutional arrangements and the states in which they eventually choose to live either together or side by side. But this is what I mean when I say there is no alternative to the end goal of peaceful coexistence. The question for me is not whether it will happen. The question is, how long will it take, and how can violent conflict and suffering be avoided along that way? All of us, but notably Israeli and Palestinian leaders and the political actors in the international community, have a political and a moral obligation to ensure that this process is as peaceful as possible. Let me finish with a quote by Martin Luther King. As a reminder to all of us what we should strive for, and not least diplomats posted in Palestine. Make a career of humanity. Commit yourself to the noble struggle for equal rights. You will make a better person of yourself, a greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in. In all the places I've been in my long career, I have met countless brave individuals and communities who committed to this struggle. I have met so many of you in Palestine. I see so many here in Jerusalem now. This is what gives me hope. Thank you and happy Europe Day.